Diana, welcome to DAO Talk.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Really excited to learn more about what you're doing in the crypto space. Maybe you can get us started just telling me a little bit more about your background and kind of how you ended up getting into crypto Web3 DAOs.
Sure. Yeah. So my background is very nonlinear and it's very fragmented, doesn't make a lot of sense together. But I actually started my career as an attorney. So I went to law school right out of college and then became an attorney in Chicago for a number of years. When I decided, I didn't really enjoy this line of work, I couldn't see myself sitting in an office, thinking about the worst case scenario all day, every day for the rest of my life. So I did a real life rage quit and I quit my job as a lawyer with no backup plan. And I was like, what I want to do right now is travel the world. I was like 26 at the time, didn't have a family, didn't really have any responsibilities besides just keeping myself alive. And I was like, I feel like I can do that. So I went from my last day of work as a lawyer straight to the airport and started traveling all around the world. And that was my life for the next 3 or so years. And so I started traveling and I was like, well, now I have to figure out a way to make money while I'm traveling. And at that time, coming from a very traditional background, I didn't know anything about different career paths or how to make money online, how to work remote. This was in early 2017, way before COVID. So people weren't just working remotely everywhere. So I started trying to figure out ways. And what I landed on was, let me just start a blog and become a travel blogger. I've always enjoyed writing, and blogging was kind of a big thing back in 2017. And I was like, I feel like I can make it. Let me at least give it a try. So I started a travel blog and I did that for a few years. I got to the point where I was able to travel for free. I would be able to get my hotels for free, activities, cool tours and things like that for free. But I wasn't making money on top of that. And I still had a mortgage to pay in Chicago and, other expenses. So eventually I found a content marketing agency that was fully remote. And so I'd be able to keep traveling and have actual income and a salary. And at the content marketing agency, we had just pivoted to a podcast offering as our main offering. So mostly helping B2B businesses start podcasts. And I had started a Web2 startup podcast as part of that. Somehow, Matt Gold, who's the CEO of Unstoppable Domains, a blockchain domain company, he found my podcast, really liked it, and hired us to help him start a podcast. So there was my first crypto client. I didn't know anything about crypto or blockchain before that. I had bought some Bitcoin back in 2017, 2018, but didn't understand. I bought it and sold it within a week and made a 2x gain. And I was like, wow, I'm a genius.
Yeah,
I should do
I'm
this.
a trader now.
I'm a trader now. I know. Yeah. But I really didn't understand anything about decentralization or what was going on behind the scenes. So that was my first exposure. Matt really taught me everything about decentralization. And for me, what really resonated and pulled me down the rabbit hole was learning what Web3 could do for content creators, since I was coming from that background, and how it could completely change the landscape, give content creators so much more opportunity to not just, create the work that they love to create, but also connect with their fans in a more meaningful way and also monetize their content more easily. And then about a month into that relationship with Unstoppable Domains, Matt essentially poached me and brought me on to work full-time at Unstoppable Domains, and the rest is history.
That's an amazing story. Yeah, I feel like the whole lawyer to rage quit is many such cases,
Yes.
In general, but definitely in crypto. I've heard that story a lot.
I've met a good number of ex-lawyers in the crypto space, and we've all gotten along perfectly. I think it just takes a very specific personality of person who thinks they might like law school and does that and then realizes they don't and gets into something as sort of controversial as crypto.
Yeah, I feel too, sometimes I think smart contracts are really law is actually the primary thing that they're disrupting versus even banking or something like that. Because I don't know, I feel the legal system gives you an appreciation for how inefficient it can be to create trust, right? And that's the foundation of what we're doing. Love the travel blogging too. That sounds like an amazing experience.
Yeah, that was definitely a very fun time, very fun period in my life. It really opened my eyes to how challenging it is to make it as a full-time content creator in Web 2. And I think that background explains a lot of my work today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Another thing I just really appreciate about your story is kind of having that like mentor, sponsor, champion, like first person bringing you into the industry. I think that's really important. I think a lot of the people I talk to who have like made it and like stuck in crypto Web3 had someone like that in their life who really helped them navigate the space, gave them their first job. When that person is kind of like a high trust person, it really opens the doors, right? Because they know a bunch of other people who are like really good and kind of know how to do things the right way in the space too. So I love to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think for a lot of my friends, at least, like that person for them is like their brother or sister or like good friend from college or something. And for me, it was a total stranger that I didn't know. And I really feel like super grateful to him because he gave me a chance when there was no reason to. Like, who would hire somebody who knows nothing about crypto to come to your company and like run your crypto podcast and like content for your company about crypto? Right. Like,
it's so cool.
He obviously like believed in me to a certain extent, but it wasn't like it didn't make logical sense. Like he just did. And I'm really glad he gave me a chance.
Love it. Love it. So yeah, tell me more about your journey within crypto. Kind of where did you go from Unstoppable Domains and what are you working on now?
Yeah, so I started at Unstoppable Domains at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. And I was leading content there. So the podcast and then other content initiatives as well. I was there for 10 months, recorded 100 podcast episodes in the 10 months I was there.
Respect.
So we were really cranking them out. Yeah. And that honestly was the best learning experience for me because in the beginning, when I knew hardly anything about crypto, it would sometimes take me days to prepare for one podcast interview. Because like if I wanted to interview you, for instance, from Tally, I would have to learn what Tally is. And to do that, I would have to learn what a DAO is, like another thing I've never heard of before. And then I would have to learn like what Open Zeppelin is, like another thing I've never heard of, and like all these things. And so it would easily take like 3 full days for me to prepare for one podcast interview. And then I would get on the call and still like half the words they said, I'd be like, this isn't the English that I know. Like, I feel like I need a crypto dictionary or something. But doing that so much really helps me to learn really quickly in the space. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And then in October of last year, I left Unstoppable Domains and I joined Rabbit Hole, which they're kind of, some people might know them as like a crypto education company. I think they're working on-chain credentialing. And then in April, a couple of months ago, I left Rabbit Hole to start Rehash, which is my new DAO that you're also part of.
That's amazing. I love that story about doing 100 podcast episodes when you weren't already crypto native and just like the pain of doing research. Like, I think everyone can identify with that somehow, right? Coming into crypto is actually really painful. I think we all need to work on that as an industry, but like inevitably it's just so hard. There's so many new disciplines to learn, and then they sort of like intersect in these ways that are like super not intuitive until you understand. But I bet that was an amazing foundation because like when you do things the hard way like that, you end up with this like very strong understanding that is almost like more powerful than if someone like spoon fed it to you the whole time.
For sure. Yeah. And like something else I will say with that too is for people who are just getting into the space, don't be afraid to learn in public. My way of learning in public was so public. It's all recorded. You can go back and listen to my initial podcast episodes from when I didn't know anything about crypto. And like, I cannot go back and listen to that because it's so cringe. I would never podcast again, probably. But I've actually gotten the best feedback from those like first 10 or 15 episodes I recorded at Unstoppable because everybody was like, these are all the questions I have and I want to ask, but I'm too scared because they seem like dumb questions. And I don't want people to think I'm dumb. And I just like straight up and asked it on a podcast that you can still go and listen to. So I would say like, don't be afraid to learn in public. Ask the questions that you think are stupid questions. People are nice in the space and willing to help. It's still small enough that people get excited when you're interested in the space. And that's like, honestly, like the best and fastest way to learn. And people enjoy following that journey too. Like that was another piece of feedback I got was people enjoyed seeing how I started from not knowing anything, like a nobody in the space, and how I progressed over time. People enjoyed seeing that journey. So don't be afraid to sort of be public, be open about that. People in this space are really generous and people aren't going to judge you. Like they'll be rooting for you along the way.
Well, in terms of the field of podcasting, I feel like, I'm a noob compared to you. You've done so many successful podcasts. So you've done Unstoppable Domains, then you scaled a podcast at Rabbit Hole too, right?
I started a new podcast there, Down the Rabbit Hole.
Yeah, Down
and
the
now
Rabbit Hole.
Anae Sim is running that, and she's great.
That's awesome. And now you're on to Rehash, which is a podcast DAO, a mix of two of my favorite things, podcasting DAOs. So perfect. Like you mentioned, I'm involved, but in the spirit of bringing our audience along for the journey, just like you were talking about, why don't you give us a quick, explain it like I'm 5. What is Rehash?
Sure. Yeah. So Rehash started as a podcast DAO, like you said. I was combining two of my big interests in the space at the time, podcasting and then DAOs. I've always wanted to build a community of people in Web3 who are interested in content and media. And I was like, how can I combine the two? Why don't I make a podcast DAO? So we launched with a Mirror crowdfund. And anybody who contributed to the crowdfund would get one of our NFTs. And by holding an NFT, you have governance rights in RehashDAO, which means that you get to nominate guests for the podcast and vote on which guests get to come on. So actually, Dennison from Tally is going to be coming on next season of the podcast. The top 3, first, second, and third place crowdfund backers got a special one-of-one NFT that would give them a spot on the podcast. So this season it was Matt Gold, actually, my number one supporter and still
circle.
My number one supporter. Cool. And Dennison got the second place. And so he'll be on the first episode of next season. And I'm really excited to talk to him about that. But so that's how Rehash started. Over time, it's progressed to much more than that. So what RehashDAO is today, it's 2 things. On the one side, Rehash helps content creators incubate and launch their content and media ideas in Web3. So that could be another podcast. It could be a video series where you explain hard to understand blockchain concepts in an easy to understand way. It could be a Web3 wiki. Any content or media related project in Web3 that you can think of, you can propose to RehashDAO, and the DAO will vote then on whether we should help launch this project or not. So that's one side. And then on the other side, we're going to have essentially a network or a co-op of content creators. These are Web3 native content creators who are vetted by us, so they're high quality, who can help Web3 companies with their content initiatives. So a lot of Web3 companies, they're started by a few devs, and content and marketing isn't really a priority of theirs. Sometimes not until year 1 or even year 2. And part of that is because they don't know much about content. And even though they definitely have content needs and goals, they're like, I don't know how to hire a content person because I don't know anything about the space. It's like if you asked me to hire a dev, I would have no idea where to start. And so with this, it's like, say you're working on a new project and you're planning on launching it next month and you want some communications around that to help your launch be more successful, you could contract with Rehash and get some of our content creators to help you put together some launch materials, like articles or videos or whatever, our content creators think would help launch that. So that's what Rehash has grown into. It's kind of like this media production house and agency in one, if you want to make that Web 2 comparison, but we're really doing everything in a very Web 3 native way.
That's amazing. I love this idea so much, and for lots of reasons. But one is I am someone who does content in Web3, and I actually also hire a lot of, freelancers or partner with content creators to create content about DAOs. And it's hard enough to find great content creators, great writers, producers, etc. Finding great writers and producers who also understand DAOs deeply enough to push the space forward with their content is extremely difficult. And I feel like there's so much value in Rehash kind of pulling those folks together, right? You have people who are very talented, but also they're active. Maybe even Rehash can serve to educate them about DAOs, help them contribute to a DAO, teach them about DAOs, makes DAO content, or just Web3 in general, right? There could be this kind of virtuous cycle that really creates a strong foundation for, professional, crypto native content.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think another benefit of the model that we're sort of looking at is this ability to co-create, which I think is going to be a big thing, not only in Web3, but we're seeing this in the Web2 world too, with, these like co-created TikTok videos where somebody like records part of a song and then allows other people to duet with them. Like this is trending in Web2 media as well. And I think with Web3, this ability to co-create is going to be super powerful. So for example, if we get somebody like a DeFi protocol, they need some help with content. They might come to us and I might say, okay, well, I'm a really strong writer, but somebody else is a lot more well-versed in DeFi. And so we can co-create together where they can maybe help with some of the substantive things. And then I can put it into words or video or whatever that help communicate it to the audience in an easy to understand way. So this ability to co-create, I think Web3 makes this super easy because we can just build a split into it, right? So like if we work together on a project and maybe somebody else, like our friend Tyler who does videos, he can come and help make a video for us. Like the three of us work together. We can just build in a split at the end of the day and say this whole project cost the company 5 ETH and we're going to have, like 25% go to Tyler, 25% go to me, and 25% to the other Tyler, and then part of that going back to the RehashDAO treasury, for example. So I'm really excited about this like possibility of co-creation that we're really trying to enable and make more of a norm in this industry.
Maybe this goes back to one of your first points about Web3 enabling content creators to like more effectively, more efficiently monetize their work. That process of like splitting can be very painful, or just like closing contracts, in the legacy world.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm also really excited about certain companies like Govern, for instance. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're essentially building like an on-chain GitHub for all DAO contributors. So right now it's like if you're a coder, you can put your code on GitHub and everybody can see that and see the work that you put in, see how long it took you to code something. In the future, you would be able to, if I write an article, for example, I could put that onto Govern, like my on-chain GitHub, essentially, and people could see, like how much did I write every day? How long did it take me to crank out this article? And then, of course, you can see the final product as well. So then when I give you my pricing, my rates for the work that I'm going to do, you have some context behind this is how long it takes her to do the work. This is her process. This is the end quality. And this is what she's charging. And does this make sense to you or not? And I think that will really help people just be able to work more effectively and in a way where, you don't have to sort of start over building your reputation from DAO to DAO, but that you'll be able to port it over more easily with something like an on-chain GitHub for all of your content.
Web3 native on-chain composable portfolios, content portfolios, just contributor like resume/portfolios could be super powerful.
Super powerful. Yeah. And it enables like the co-creation too, because just like on GitHub, you can have somebody else, fork your code or contribute to your code base. And together you can build an app together. So like in the same way with content, you can write an article together, you can make a video together, just all by contributing to the same like GitHub repo.
That's amazing. If it's cool with you, I want to circle back briefly to talk a little bit about the governance process with RehashDAO. You talked about you did a mirror crowdfund. I think that minted different types of NFTs. And then that really enables the community to help kind of like co-create or curate the content, as well as kind of vote on what projects get spun out. So talk to me a little bit more about that. Like, what are the different tiers of NFTs? What rights do they come with? And then how does that actually play out in the governance process with Rehash?
Sure, yeah. So the Mirror crowdfund we launched, there were 3 tiers of NFTs. The top tier is what we called Queen of the Pod. And those were those top 3 backers. So like the one that Matt Gold got and Dennison got and somebody else as well. And then the next tier is what we called Podcaster NFTs. And then the bottom tier is Listener NFTs. So Podcaster NFTs give you the power to vote, not just nominate. So at the very bottom, the listener NFTs, anybody with an NFT has the power to nominate guests for the podcast. So anyone can do that. And then the middle tier, the podcaster NFT, those people can vote on which guests they want to hear on the podcast. And the way I think about this is sort of the way I think about content curation in a decentralized manner too, is where with decentralized content, you want to have everybody be able to contribute content, but at the same time, you need to maintain quality, right? And so that middle layer of like the curators is what helps you maintain the level of quality that you need. So at the bottom tier, we have, everybody can nominate guests. That's like the creation part. And then the middle tier is just the voting. Those are our curators, the people who we trust more to say, okay, I've done my research. Like, I know these people, I know the ecosystem, and this is who I think would be really good for the podcast. So that's how we structured it. And then now how all of that fits into the bigger RehashDAO, since, the idea has evolved from just a podcast DAO to a bigger media DAO, is that people who participated in our original crowdfund and who hold those Rehash podcast NFTs will have governance rights over the Rehash podcast as well as over the bigger Rehash DAO. So again, with Rehash podcast, the governance mostly is about nominating and voting on guests. And then with the bigger Rehash DAO, that's where you get to vote on which project proposals pass. And so, for instance, right now we have a project proposal from somebody who would like to launch a podcast with Rehash. And by having governance rights over the bigger Rehash DAO, you'll get to vote on which projects we take on and help fund and help launch.
That's amazing. It's funny to think like, if we were to rewind a year in time, DAO governance meant something pretty specific. It's basically like, okay, you could potentially help control a protocol, maybe adjust some risk parameters, maybe adjust fees, things like that. And that's great. And that part of the DAO world is still growing quickly. But I'm personally very excited by entirely new types of DAOs where governance means something totally different, right? So like the idea that quote unquote governance is just a way of helping curate content in a decentralized way, I think is really exciting. In addition to kind of having maybe slightly more traditional governance rights over like which projects get funded and invested in. So I'm really excited to see this experiment play out within Rehash. Another reason it's exciting to me is it brings a totally different kind of type of person into the space, because maybe if you're voting on like makers, risk parameters, or collateral types, you're probably really into finance. You're maybe somewhat of a quant, right? Maybe you have some traditional like corporation governance experience, which is all great and valuable. But I have a lowly listener NFT, but I'm still excited and I still make proposals. And like that's a much easier place for me to engage because I don't come from TradFi. Like I'm basically a content marketer like you. And so, it's just a really like different and cool way for me to be able to actually contribute to a project. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in Rehash who feel the same way.
Yeah, for sure. Governance at its core it just means voting, right? It just means like giving somebody a say in something. And I think originally we saw that play out more in DeFi because crypto started with just DeFi. It was very finance focused. And a lot of people now who aren't in crypto or Web3 yet still hear crypto or hear Web3 and think like, oh, that's just for like finance bros or maybe like coders too. But now I think because enough people from the mainstream have come into this space that there are people thinking about other sides of how can we organize and how can we use this new technology to do other things for our society that go beyond just banking and finance. And I think that's where like things like this come in, and things like crypto culture and society, which is that like liberal arts DAO, I think are super cool. And just helping people think about like a more human side of like how can we operate? Like we're not all just robots, we're not all just like people sitting in our basement typing away on our computers. Like we're trying to make a difference in the world that we live in. And no matter how much we move towards the digital world, the physical world still exists and we can't ignore that. So yeah, I think I'm excited to see that as well. I echo everything you just said. And also with your lowly listener NFT, we are building in mechanisms for people to be able to upgrade their NFTs. So for example, right now we have essentially like a contest going on for the rest of this season of the podcast where you can tweet anything about like our podcast episodes. So you could do like a summary thread like we've seen ScribeDAO people do. You could cut out like a clip from one of our podcast videos or the audio and write like a little summary yourself. You could create memes from it. Whatever it is you want to do, you can do any of that. And then you just tag our account on Twitter, RehashWeb3. And at the end of the season, we'll take the like most engaged tweets, the top 20% most engaged tweets. And we have a little treasury pool set aside to reward those people and also to upgrade your NFT. So if you have a listener NFT right now, you would get a podcaster NFT. If you don't have an NFT at all right now, like you missed the Mirror crowdfund, then we would give you a listener NFT for free as part of that. So we are building mechanisms for people to be able to earn these NFTs through their contributions rather than through buying them like we did in the original crowdfund.
That is exciting. I'm gonna have to get into my meme bag.
Oh,
Few understand that you can upgrade your NFT. That's super exciting. One day I won't be a total pleb. Cool. Well, thanks so much for going into the weeds on Rehash with me. I think it's a super exciting project. If it's cool with you, I want to ask you maybe a slightly more open-ended question just about the crypto space in general.
Sure.
It's time for some hot takes. So this is a two-part question. First part is, what do you love the most about working in crypto Web3 DAOs? Like, what gets you excited when you wake up in the morning? And then the second part is the opposite. So what's one thing that you don't like as much about the space, that frustrates you, that you think we need to work on as a community over the next few years?
Okay, I'm going to try to answer this without getting canceled. So
always a good goal.
The thing I love most, there are honestly like so many things I love about working in this space. The thing I love most is probably just the energy in this space. Like, I feel like the people working in the space are really passionate about actually making a change, making a positive change for our world. And that's something that really excites me. One thing that I don't like about the space is probably just like how nonstop it is. So, like crypto markets never sleep. It's 24/7 and people sort of work with that cycle. And you definitely have a community of people in Web3 who really feed into that grind and hustle culture. And it's something like I completely understand it. I think it's something I totally fed into too, like in my early 20s as well. So I completely understand it. But I think at this point, I think the risk of that is A, you get burnt out really fast, which I think a lot of people in this space have experienced. And B, I think it can make you forget that there is a whole world outside of crypto. So when you're working in this like Web3 bubble, you think, oh, this is like how the world is. Like there's so much money floating around. Like these are the problems we're trying to solve. And it's like, no, but that's like 1% of the world. Like the rest of the world is dealing with things like poverty, like lack of clean water, like basic issues. And I don't think we can forget about those things. That's why I love people like, like Scott Moore from Gitcoin who thinks about these things all the time. Or like I just spoke with, I don't know if you know, Ali Borda. She's also involved in Gitcoin DAO and some other initiatives.
I've been trying to get her on DAO Talk.
She's incredible.
Yeah.
I just had her on the podcast. You have to try and get her on because she's incredible. She like grew up in Peru, was volunteering at all these like organizations in Peru growing up and came here for college and got involved in. She just has such a broader perspective of like what's important in the world than I think a lot of people in like North American Web3. So yeah, I would just say that's probably like the non-stopness and like the bubble culture is probably my least favorite thing.
I hear you. As a fellow boomer, I even have boomer tokens thanks to you. I totally hear you. Like, just trying to be mindful about like sustainable work practices.
Yeah.
And you kind of talked about like losing perspective. I think that's so true. Like that's actually one of the key, I think, benefits of work-life balance. Things like taking vacation or like having a hobby that isn't Web3. Mm-hmm. It's like not making it your personality, right? Is that you lose perspective on like what you're doing in the rest of the world. I was talking to Lee Quinn. I don't know if you know her. She does Defem Mag. It's like a media DAO-ish project. Her answer to this question about something that frustrates her is like, I wish that not everyone felt like they had to make crypto their identity to work in the space. She was like, it's just a tool, right? Like I use spoons every day, but I don't identify as like a spoon maxi. I was like, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
But like, it's kind of true. Like when you think about it, you're like, wow, everyone, it creates this like barrier to the space because people on the outside are like, I don't want to become a bored ape. Like I just like to like learn about this thing,
Yeah, that's like exactly what my sister says. Like my sister lives in Williamsburg. All her friends are in crypto. She's very immersed in it. Like she can easily like get into the space, work in the space if she wanted to. But she's so resistant to it. And that's her biggest complaint is she's like, Web3 is so intense. Like if you're in Web3, like you're in Web3. That's like all you can ever do. And she's not wrong. You know, that kind of is the vibe. And I always tell people, I totally agree with you. Like you've got to have hobbies outside of crypto. Like I get that you're passionate about crypto. I am too. That's why I work in the space. But please have hobbies outside of crypto, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I like weekly try to post like, this is your weekly reminder to go outside. You know, that's sort of like my hobby. But anything like sewing, like whatever, like it can literally be anything. Just
as
have
long as you
some
don't turn
hobby.
it to sewing on the blockchain. That's the problem. I love to go outside too. I like to hike. I see your awesome hiking pics. Like, just don't make it like hike to earn, and you're good.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you don't have to add to earn after everything, unless it's a joke.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. I have one last question for you. It's not crypto related, you know, in the spirit of like having other parts of our lives. And this is probably gonna be hard for you to answer because you said you were a travel blogger, but what is your favorite place in the world and why?
I get asked this so much. Every time I tell people I'm a travel blogger, they're like, oh, so what's your favorite place in the world? And it's like comparing apples and oranges, right? Like everywhere is so different. If I had to pick one, I would probably say Iceland. I just love that whole Nordic region. I mean, the nature is gorgeous. There's endless hiking to do. And that would probably have to be my answer, but it's a tough one.
Awesome. Yeah, I've never been to Iceland, but it seems kind of accessible to get there, right? From like most of North America.
From the East Coast, definitely. From
Okay.
like New York or anywhere. I think from New York, it's like a 5-hour flight, like less than 6-hour flight. So it's super easy. Like hop on at night, sleep through the night, and you're there. Like that's it. Super easy.
Yeah, it sounds cool. I always see pictures of like, there's a lot of like geothermal activity, right? That kind of like surfaces.
Yeah.
But also in like an icy landscape.
Yes. Yeah. That
sounds pretty
contrast,
dope.
you'll like see like snow-covered mountains and then you'll see the hot springs right next to it. And it's just absolutely gorgeous.
Sounds awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining.
Cool. Thanks for having me.